splendor of the sun which dissipates the darkness of this whole world comes from me. And the splendor of the moon and the splendor of the fire are also from me. Purport. The unintelligent cannot understand how things are taking place. But one can begin to be established in knowledge by understanding what the Lord explains here. Everyone sees the sun, moon, fire, and electricity. One should simply try to understand that the splendor of the sun, the splendor of the moon, the splendor of electricity, or fire are coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In such a conception of life, the beginning of Krishna consciousness, lies a great deal of advancement for the conditioned soul in this material world. The living entities are essentially the parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. And he is giving herewith the hint how they can come back to Godhead, back to home. Paragraph. Fasten your seatbelts. We're going to hear something that's against modern science. From this verse we can understand that the sun is illuminating the whole universe. There are different universes, and there are different suns, moons, and planets also. But in each universe, there's only one sun. What? As stated in Bhagavad-gita 10:21. The moon is one of the stars. Nakshatranam aham shasi. Sunlight is due to the spiritual effulgence in the spiritual sky of the Supreme Lord. With the rise of the sun, the activities of human beings are set up. They set fire to prepare their foodstuffs, that's human beings. They set fire to start the factories, etc. So many things are done with the help of fire. Therefore, sunrise, fire, and moonlight are so pleasing to the living entities. Without their help, no living entity can live. So if one can understand that the light and the splendor of the sun, moon, and fire are emanating from the Supreme Personality Godhead Krishna, then one's Krishna consciousness will begin. By the moonshine, all the vegetables are nourished. The moonshine is so pleasing that people can easily understand that they are living by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Without his mercy, there cannot be sun. Without his mercy, there cannot be moon. And without his mercy, there cannot be fire. And without the help of the sun, moon, and fire, no one can live. These are some thoughts to provoke Krishna consciousness in the conditioned soul. Well, the overall principle is quite simple. And the overall principle that's quite simple is a Vedic statement, Vedic conception, that there's something that's the source of everything. Or everything has its source of emanation. Either say it forwards or backwards. Same as what Krishna says. Aham sarvasya prabhavo matak sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajante mam Bhava Samandita. That's a nice verse for you all to learn when you get to learning 10th chapter Bhagavad-gita. Krishna says, forwards and backwards, I'm the source of everything, everything emanates from me. I'm the source of everything, everything emanates from me. So whatever the Vedic conception or Vedanta conception of the absolute truth is that from which everything emanates, and the Vedas are searching for whatever that is. And whatever that is, that's the absolute truth, that's God. And in the 10th chapter, 5 chapters ago, from this chapter 15, Krishna said he's the source. And after stating that, Arjuna goes, wow, you're God. You're not just my friend. You're God. And I've acted in my relationship with you in ways that are like a friend, and I hope I haven't offended you. Please help me understand ways by which I can always remember you. That's a nice question, particularly because the purpose of all do's and don'ts within the course of the Vedic teachings is always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. Very simple principle. Always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. Of course, it helps to know who's Krishna. Then you can, it makes it much easier to remember him. So, in the latter part of the 10th chapter, I'm mentioning that because it's very similar to what's happening in this verse. There are vibhutis, or opulences, spiritual opulence manifest in this world, which is seemingly a contradiction, but not really. We'll touch on it. Opulences that are of Krishna manifest in this world. So he's the superlative of whatever exists in this. Think of anything, and the superlative of that anything, that's Krishna. Now, in a broader sense, everything that comes from Krishna, so everything is Krishna. In a sense of oneness of all things with their source of emanation. But amongst all things, Krishna is the best of all things. And so that which is the best of all things, the superlative of all categories of things, that's Krishna. About mountains, I have the Himalayas, I have fishes, I am the shark, and of everything, I'm the superlative. The intelligence of the intelligent, etc. He's the best. He's the superlative of all groups. So reference is made in this purport to a verse that's in chapter 10, similar to what this verse in chapter 15 is saying. The verse in chapter 10, text 21, the moon is one of the stars. Nakshatranam aham shasi. That's the moon is the chief amongst the stars. And read carefully in that purport. I'll just share something with you. Hope you don't mind. This very same point that's in this purport was discussed in our GBC conference for about 3 weeks. Is Prabhupada and are the Vedas teaching us A or B? And the answer is A. There is one sun in this universe, and all other luminaries in this universe are reflections of the light of the sun, such as the moon or the stars. Are the stars fiery, effulgent bodies like our sun, and there's many, many suns? Or is there one sun per universe? And there's many, maybe we're not seeing, maybe what we're seeing is, multiple universes. And there's multiple suns because there's multiple universes. We can just happen to see through the layers of the universe. There's, permutations and combinations of what might be what we see. And when you don't live in New York City. If you live out in the country, you look at the sky at night, you can see luminaries, stars, and so modern cosmology doesn't agree with what Prabhupada is saying, or Prabhupada doesn't agree with what modern cosmology says. So I just mentioning this. We had a 3-week interactive discussion on this topic, and things that it says elsewhere, and things that it says in Prabhupada's purports elsewhere, and verses in the Bhagavatam. And weighing in on this discussion was this devotee Antardweep, who is the lead person in the Temple of Vedic Planetarium. So he lives, breathes, eats, sleeps, passes, the cosmology, Vedic cosmology. And not just because Prabhupada said it, but from his enormous study on the subject, that the Mahabharata, Vishnu Purana, Padma Purana, and this and that, and Siddhanta Shiromani, and everything else. His conclusion in this little exchange, 3-week exchange, was there's one sun in every universe, and we look up into the sky with your telescopes or with whatever you use to look, and there's light that's reflecting the light of the sun. Now, this is, you can get upset with me at the end of this. That's quite okay. Maybe you're already upset hearing what I'm saying. The Vedas state that even the light of the sun is reflection of the light of the Brahmajyoti. Should I say it again? The Brahmajyoti is the vastness of the spiritual sky, that is spiritual light emanating from the Vaikuntha planets and the Vaikuntha bodies, and the whole Vaikuntha realm is illuminated by Brahma Jyoti. Jyoti means light. Brahma Jyoti is spiritual light. And the sun is a reflection of that Brahma Jyoti. And then the light of the sun, this is something that I learned from Bhakti Siddhanta. Have you heard of the Suryakanta gem? Anyone heard of that one before? It's a gem that draws light from the sun. It doesn't like sparkle in the sunshine, but it draws light from the sun, and there's like fire inside the gem. It's self-luminous, drawing light from the sun. So if you had one of those, you put it in your hand, it would light up the room because it's luminous. Put it in a box, it'll light up the box. It's luminous. But it draws the light from the sun. And the sun, which is our understanding, is it's a fiery planet, and the fire of the sun is drawing its luminousness from the Brahma Jyoti, from the spiritual light. It too is a reflection of the Brahma Jyoti, and the sun, the emanating fiery light has the capacity to have that light reflect and or stored elsewhere, like in the Suryakanta gem. Or it could be a whole planet that's also fiery, but it's a reflection of that fiery light of the sun. And then that fiery light of the sun, by process of photosynthesis, it's stored in wood. Like this table, not hot at all, but inside there's fire. That's the Vedic conception of how fire is stored, and how you get the fire to come out is you put fire next to the fire, or next to the wood, and the fire comes out. But it's fire is there. So it's mentioned in the purport, the light of the sun, the light of the moon, the light of fire. The Sanskrit word is teja. Teja means splendor. Teja can also mean strength. Tejas, strength, or splendor. And the splendor or the strength of the sun, moon, or fire comes from Krishna. I mean, that's the important thing. Even if you know what the Vedas say, what Prabhupada says that the Vedas say, and modern science says something else, you can get lost in that if you want. But that's actually less important. It's important, but it's less important than the primary. There's one source of everything. I had a conversation around 11:30 today with a devotee who had just completed a 4-hour discussion yesterday evening, Friday evening, at Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. And the topic was conceptions of divinity. And he only got halfway through the topic. And there were so many questions, it went for 4 hours. And centering around her divinity, again, this is like conceptions of God. So the starting point is why people today, or even before today, yesterday and previous history, why people may be attracted to atheism. Without mentioning the garden varieties, there's garden varieties. One of the students in the class, he said, was a karma mimamsa person. Not necessarily, it turns out after 45 minutes of discussion, not necessarily because he believes it, but he was frustrated with the mistaken application of Vedic principle by people that really didn't know what they were doing and were deceiving others, and he was so frustrated he accepted another principle. This karma mimamsa principle means the topmost thing, that which rules everybody and everything, is karma. And he gave, as an example, Krishna died, got shot in the heel with an arrow by a hunter, and he died and left a material body. And Ramchandra, he entered into the Sarayu River, and he met his destiny. Karma rules. Which is what, it's an atheistic philosophy, and the atheistic karma mimamsa people say, if there's God or not God, it really doesn't matter, because above God is karma, and God he's obedient to karma. He dispenses karma according to the laws of karma. That's what's like divine. And he's just an instrument of the divine. So there. You don't have to worship God, you just have to do good karma. That's karma mimamsa. It's an atheistic philosophy. So what does that have to do with this verse this evening? The verse this evening, Prabhupada is emphasizing, it's a beginning to restore our forgotten and dormant Krishna consciousness, to recognize there is a source of everything, and it's not karma. The source of everything is, as Krishna says in chapter 10, or there's other places in Bhagavad-gita where Krishna says, Mattak parataram nanyat kintyat asti dhananjaya. There's no truth superior to me. Now, truth has different meanings of the word truth. It can be as opposed to a lie, there's a truth. That's one meaning. It's true, we're at 26 Second Avenue. We're in the storefront at 26 Second Avenue. It's on 2nd Avenue. Or, of course, those are relative truths. Once upon a time there was no 2nd Avenue, and once upon a time there wasn't a storefront, and things are temporal. So there's an absolute truth upon which all of the truths rest, and so truth, in the sense of Bhagavad Gita, is that upon which everything else rests. So Krishna is saying there isn't a truth upon which he rests. Every other truth rests upon him. He's the absolute truth. There's no truth superior to me. Which is understanding the source of everything. So then there's a trick question. You ready for the trick question? If God is the source of everything, then what's the source of God? Excuse me, but by definition, whatever it is that's the source of everything, that's God. And now you're asking what's the source of whatever is the source of everything. That's a semantic question. That's, we have a place for those kind of questions. It's a garbage can. By definition, that which, whatever it is, that's the source of everything, that's the absolute truth. And you want to ask, what's the source of the absolute truth? The absolute truth, by definition, whatever it is, that's the source of everything. So the message of Bhagavad Gita, it was a very interesting topic, a 4-hour, it didn't get finished, you got halfway through topic. Conceptions of divinity. So Bhagavad Gita is teaching the conception of divinity is that source of everything is Krishna. So now there's 3 things amplified in the purport that says our life is dependent upon the light of the sun, the light of the moon, and the light of fire, and Krishna is the source. So be happy and thankful and use those things that come from the source in service to the source. That's what it's for. That's what and when we're rightly situated, when our consciousness is aligned with truth, with a capital T, we engage things that come from the truth with the truth. That's in service to the Supreme. It leads to knowing the source of everything, leads to service to the Supreme. Go back to that verse that I cited. Aham sarvasya prabhava matak sarvam pravartate. That's the first half. Krishna is saying, I'm the source, aham, first person singular. I am the source of everything. Then backwards. Everything comes from me. Iti madva, when you know that, iti, thus knowing, bhajante mam. You engage in devotional service to the source of everything, whatever exists. It belongs to the Supreme, it's meant for the service of the Supreme. We engage ourselves accordingly, we can be happy. And all our necessities are there, and the problem of being in anxiety because you're a thief is gone, and you're living, lawfully, recognizing the source of everything. No, that's nice, being without anxiety and without fear and peaceful and happy. And then comes, our conditioned life where it doesn't happen so quickly because we have these other kinds of tendencies. You can say it starts with the conceptions of life that we have, and therefore this chapter 15, the yoga of the Supreme Person, it's helping us to zoom in on the source of everything, Krishna, from looking at things that our life depends upon and makes us happy. Necessities. There's other necessities. You have to have air, and but Krishna is the source of all those things. But just for this purpose. And supposing you're a scientist that wants to know how can you say this? What's the technology of how Krishna is within everything? Just like you have this idea that there's fire inside wood. Harumph, fire inside wood. There's combustible material and you combust it, and that's how it combusts. There's not fire inside this wood. The Vedic model doesn't disallow that there's other models that explain things. I'll give two examples, but I'll come back to the Vedic model is Krishna is the source of everything. So these days, people function getting from point A to point B by their GPS. And there was a time when there was no GPS and people could still get from one place to another place. And they kind of used street maps. Or then in between GPS and street maps was you go to some website and it tells you, yahoo.com, and it tells you how to get from point A to point B and go 300 yards and turn right on such and such street and then follow that for 2 miles and turn left on such and such highway, and that's another way to get from point A to point B. There's multiple. You get a globe out and you map yourself out three-dimensional how to get from point A to point B, etc. The real goal is to get from point A to point B. There can be different models of how to get from point A to point B. And it's not that one is right and the other is wrong. The goal is to get from point A to point B. You can ride a subway, you can ride a bus, you can drive a car, you can walk, you can ride a bicycle. There's different ways to get from point A to point B. Not one is right and the other is wrong. Here's one that's a little more abstract. I'll come back to the verse. Cosmology, Vedic, I hope you don't mind. Vedic cosmology is geocentric, which means the earth is at the center, which means specifically everything is viewed from the point of observation. And in that geocentric model, there's a description that the earth is moving in relation to the sun is moving in relation to the earth, and they're both correct. And in the 5th canto of the Bhagavatam, the person who was hearing Shukadeva Goswami describe this is Maharaj Pariksit. He says, wait a minute. Over here you said this, and over there you said that, and it sounds like a contradiction. You said the sun is moving around the earth, and you said the earth is moving around the sun. So it's a contradiction. Could you explain? And you want to hear how Shukadeva Goswami answers? It's really cool. It sounds like mumbo jumbo, but it's not. He says, consider a potter's wheel, and you put a glob of clay on the potter's wheel. No, you have an ant on the potter's wheel, and the potter's wheel, let's say, is moving clockwise really fast, spinning, zoom, zoom, zoom. So the ant, in relation to the potter's wheel, is moving in a clockwise direction really fast. But supposing the ant was walking really slowly, counterclockwise, you could say he's walking counterclockwise, while he's also moving very quickly clockwise, because the potter's wheel is spinning. And both statements are correct. That's how he answers it. Sounds like, wait a minute, you didn't answer my question. But he did answer his question, because from the earth-centered perspective, the sun rises and sets every 24 hours. And the sun rising and setting moves in a clockwise direction. If you're looking at the Earth planet from the North Pole and looking down on the surface of the Earth, or a two-dimensional picture of the surface of the Earth, as the Earth spins, the movement of the sun in relation to the Earth is clockwise, and it moves within 24 hours. And in addition, from the perspective of the sun and the Earth, the sun is moving on the ecliptic plane every 365 days, or 360, or whatever the math is. Just like for those in the northern hemisphere, in New York we're in the northern hemisphere, in India they're in the northern hemisphere, there's the day when the day is longest and the night is shortest. For us in the solar calendar, it's something like June 21. And then from that date, the sun starts moving down to the point where it's equinox. The day and the nights are equal length. It goes down and down and down into the southernmost point, and nights, the northern hemisphere, the nights are the nights are longest and the days are shortest. And then the sun starts moving in the northerly direction. And then there's another equinox. So with winter solstice and summer solstice, and equinox. That's the ant moving slowly in a counterclockwise direction around the potter's wheel that's spinning very fast in a clockwise direction. Simultaneously two motions. It's relative motion. Now you can describe that relative motion however you like. I mean, as long as it works. You can describe from the perspective of the sun, which Copernicus preferred, or you could describe according to the perspective of the Earth, which the Vedic cosmology does. And I learned this when I started visiting China. Ancient Chinese cosmology is similarly geocentric. In fact, the ancient cosmologies were all geocentric, and then came along Copernicus and said, no, you guys got it backwards. The sun is at the center, and all the planets moving around the sun. It's relative motion. And as long as you have the right mathematical formulas and you plug the numbers in according to the position of the stars, that can then tells you all kinds of things about cosmology, then you can calculate where all the other planets are. Just have to have the right model and the right equations. Plug the numbers in. So what does that have to do with this verse? Whether you have this model or that model, is there a source? What the conception of divinity? What's the source of everything? And we are included. We're part of that source of. It's coming up in a couple more verses. Prabhupada represents it in this purport that hasn't even come up yet. But we, the living entities, we're not matter, we're spirit soul. That's chapter 2. But we, the living entity, are part and parcel of the supreme living entity. We're part of that source of everything. That's who we are. And everything is also part of that source of everything. And things that sustain our lives, that make us happy. And it's the beginning to see of Krishna consciousness, awakening or restoring of Krishna consciousness, to see that Krishna is within everything. Or everything is of Him. From Him. Now the 10th chapter is the superlative of everything. This chapter 15 is everything that's beneficial for us. At least particularly this verse, the sun, the moon, and fire. And what's electricity? It's fire. How do you, if you want to be have an electric company and generate electricity and make some money selling electricity, you got to have fuel. Where's the fuel come from? It comes from the energy of the sun stored. It can be, hydroelectric power, so that's the sun's energy evaporates water from the seas or lakes or whatever, and it goes into the form of clouds, it comes down in the form of rain, it comes down in the form of rivers, and you capture that energy and make electricity. What's electricity? It's the light of the sun. And the light of the sun is from Krishna. And the light of the moon is from Krishna. The light of the fire, the light of electricity. This teja, the splendor. There's the splendor us. And there's the splendor. Now if you're an atheist, there's no splendorous. There's just splendor. It's a material energy. All there is, if you're an atheist, all there is matter, and the laws governing matter, and that's it. Everything can be explained that way. You don't need God. You silly people. But that alone is, confronted by the message of the Vedas. There is a source of everything. And then there's details of how that one thing is the source of everything. And naturally there's going to be differences of points of view of how the one thing that's the source of everything manifests himself, including the light of the sun. Not exactly a reflection like, here's a mirror and here's an apple, and in the mirror is the reflection. It's looking just like the apple. That's one kind of reflection. There's another kind that, like this, I like the example, the Suryakanta gem or stone. It's luminous. Leave it over there for, 20 years, and it's luminous. It's captured light of the sun, and it's luminous. Not self-luminous. It's luminous from the light of the sun, but it's luminous. And similarly, the light of the sun is luminous because of the light of the Brahma Jyoti, the light of the spiritual effulgence of the Supreme Lord. It doesn't give, to my knowledge, and maybe it's somewhere, what's the technology? How does the light of the Brahma Jyoti get, stored over here in the sun, and then it's like all this flames and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. How does that happen? The technology isn't described, but the principle is described. Now, maybe the day will come when there's some technology folks that can figure it out. I was just listening, I'll end with this, just listening to this description, riding with Chandrasekhar Swami in his car, actually finished his car, take us to this program in Long Island during that stormy night last night. Prabhupada was saying there may be apparent contradictions within the Vedas, and he pointed to one. For example, it is said two contradictory things. The stool of an animal makes you unclean. You touch your stool, the stool of an animal, and you're unclean, you'd have to take bath. You can't go worship a deity after touching stool, you have to take bath. And it is said that the stool of a cow, or cow dung, is pure. Now that's a contradiction. And how do we take what appears to be a contradiction? It's Vedic, it's from Narayana, infallible source. Now, he gave the name of some scientist, didn't catch it. Some Indian gentleman that spent, probably 2 decades studying cow dung. I mean, they have scientists that study the flagella of an E. coli bacteria and how many different parts there are in the E. coli bacteria. The E. coli bacteria is what swims around in your stool. So he studied the properties of cow dung and found that it has, Prabhupada's words, all antiseptic properties. You could put cow dung on an open wound and it'll heal it because it has antiseptic properties. You can, some place that's unclean, you can make it clean by applying cow dung, which is a contradiction to the other statement. So it's not all stool of animals or dung of animals is antiseptic and pure, but cow dung is. So he was indicating that things that appear to be contradictory to our normal sensibility, it's injunction that is to be accepted, and there may be some method to research and verify or not. In this case, there is. But we may not know the technology of how to verify that the light of the sun is somehow or another storing the light of the Brahmajyoti. There's something about the sun that permits that to happen, and it manifests the fire of the Brahmajyoti, or the light of the Brahmajyoti. However it does that. Technology-wise, we don't know. But the Vedic statement is, that's the statement. Now, last point. How are we going to know what that is? How are we going to know? This is chapter 10, beginning verses of chapter 10. How are we going to know what existed before we existed? Well, you won't know because it's before you existed, whatever that is. So you can't know by experimentation. You can use your capacity for logic and reason, but that's fallible. We all know that. It starts with sense perception, and even once you've taken distorted sense perception, you have to juggle it in such a way that it comes out with this answer, then someone says, no, it's got to have that answer, and it's inconclusive. You're never going to know. Then Krishna says, but there's one way to know. Great sages, demigods, most elevated personalities try and try and try. They don't know, they can't know. But there's one way to know. And the one way to know is that which existed before you existed, it discloses. This is what existed before you existed. And that's how you can know. And that's what the Vedas are. It's revealing God, or revealing the source of everything, which is God. And Krishna is declaring, I'm that source of everything. And here he's giving some other indications of how he's the source of the splendor, the tejas of sun, moon, fire, electricity. And recognizing he's the source, and because he's the source, it's meant for him, and he's present, at least in terms of his energy, is present in our life, which we're taking benefit from. It awakens our Krishna consciousness. Now there's a series of other verses that are like this. chapter 15. Okay. Any confusion or discussion? Atmanivedana.
Yeah, you started to talk about the question I was thinking about before. I was already thinking about the thing you're saying is spiritual technology. I was thinking about it before you talked about it. So the issue is that the sun stores. Krishna says here that we're reading here how, but because of the Brahmajyoti effulgence, the sun has light, and you're explaining how the sun stores it, and how the technology works. We don't know. I guess and you can just repeat that to whatever I say, I suppose. But I just wanted to add one detail to the question, and maybe you'd like to address it differently, which is what makes me particularly wonder about this issue is that we understand spiritual energy is such an ananda, eternity, bliss, and knowledge, and material energy is
it's opposite.
Right, it's temporary, and when the Bhagavad-gita describes the elements, earth, water, air, fire, etc. So fire is one of these material temporary elements. At least when I talk to people, when I think about these things conceptually, I think they're two quite distinct things: the spiritual and the material energy. And perhaps sometimes in my experience, I don't actually distinguish them quite so much. Sometimes I feel like I have some spiritual realization, and I even with some, I don't know, some perception. So that's my confusion.
Well, maybe state your question in a different way and see if it's the same as your question.
Okay.
God is all spiritual. How does something material come to something that's all spiritual? Earth, water, fire, air, ether. He's all spiritual. And those things are clearly material. So how does it work? How do you get material from spiritual? It's another way of saying.
Yeah.
Now how do the two connect,
true.
the spiritual material?
Yeah.
Well, our beloved founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada, made things really easy. Maybe too easy for people that are complicated, like some of us. But he said, like an electrician, electricity is one energy. But the electrician knows how to take electricity and make something hot or make something cold, which are opposite, hot and cold. But he knows the technology of using electricity. He makes a profession out of it. Heating and cooling systems, just with electricity. And he used that as an example to say, actually Krishna's energy is one, and depending upon how he chooses, then that one energy can act in a spiritual or can act in a material way. Huh? Well, here's a nice example, one of my favorites, and that is we hear it every year at the time of Krishna Janmashtami, when the first 6 children of Devaki were killed. Child number 7 of Devaki, because it was the 8th child of Devaki that was prophesied would kill Kamsa. So when the 7th child of Devaki, that was Balaram, was in the womb of Devaki, Krishna called Yogamaya, that's his spiritual potency, his internal potency, and gave her some service. And the first service was transfer this 7th child, Balaram, from the womb of Devaki to the womb of Rohini. Second service. After that, you appear in the womb of Mother Yashoda, and you will take birth as her child. Meanwhile, I'm going to appear as the 8th child of Devaki, and we'll be born on the same night, and I'm going to ask my father Vasudeva to transfer me from the prison house of Kamsa to the side of Mother Yashoda, and you, as the female baby, will be brought back to the prison house of Kamsa. And then the next service is Kamsa's going to try to kill you. But don't worry, you're my Yogamaya potency, he can't kill you. And when he fails to kill you, then your next service is you can distribute yourself throughout all the land, and you'll be known by various names of Durga, the external potency. And he's speaking to the internal potency. So according to his indication, she's doing this, and she's doing that. And she can do this or do that according to his indication. No problema. Doesn't give the technology. But that's his tejas, or his shakti, his splendor, his potency, and she does what he wants. Here's another example. Same principle. Another one I like. It's time for creation. And Mahavishnu, his picture is in that blue painting down below the lotus flower. He's reclining in the causal ocean, Mahavishnu, and during the time of cosmic annihilation, all living entities, and that's a lot of living entities, not just this universe full, but all universes worth of living entities are within his gigantic body. And he's contemplating, gee, I'd like to see these living entities experience the fullness of potential happiness that they have. It's a compassionate desire. And his internal potency, his spiritual potency, knows the mood of her master, Mahavishnu, so she assists him. And she transfers all those living entities to the glance of Mahavishnu, who is glancing at a reflection of her. The internal potency has a reflection, or Chaya Devi, or the external energy, the Pradhan, but it's in this special undifferentiated state, so it's got a special term or language that applies. And she, that the internal potency, takes his time energy, which is eternal, and an expansion under her direction, an expansion of that eternal time is carried with the glance, and then time as we know it, the past, present, or future kind, is carried. Because you need past, present, future in order to have activity in creation of any kind. But it's one potency. Eternal time becomes this past, present, or future time. What's the technology? What's the will of the Supreme Lord? He just wills it, and voila. No problema. It's just for the purpose of serving him, his potencies do as he wishes. They know how to do. They don't have to go to school. They're his eternal potencies. And they can act variously according to his indication. So they do. Now, go back to your question. Earth, water, fire, air, ether. You know, this wall is it's material. It's now you see it and now you don't. Like, you know, the gas station that was next door, and look what's there now. It's taking them a long time to put that thing up. It's not a gas station anymore, that's for sure.
Back there as well.
Yeah, back there as well. Yeah, because they sold the air rights. But, that's temporary too. What was the Sunoco station is what it is now, and what it is now is going to be something else later. And that's, that's a material manifestation, but behind that material manifestation, there's Krishna. And Krishna lives or exists in eternal time. And where there's eternal time, there's not Sunoco stations and high-rise buildings. It's eternal time. So that's the background behind all things. And Krishna may sanction the desire of the living entity, the developer that bought the building and got an approval and is doing what he's doing. Got a bank loan and whatever else, however else you do what you do. And he's sanctioning. He has potencies. Krishna has potencies and can sanction. And he doesn't have to do anything, but he sanctions, and the potencies then move according to his sanction. The important thing here, I understand. I believe I understand your question. How do you get material from spiritual? How do the two things fit together? Because one's clearly this, and the other is that. How they fit together. It's his energy that's variously manifest according to his ichcha, his desire. And his desire is according to the inclination of living entities. Ultimately, his desire is living entities let go of their independent desire and desire entirely in a loving relationship with him. But, how do you start that off? Well, the message of Bhagavad-gita is how to start that off. You see everything in relation to him. Just like the verse that 630 Bhagavad-gita that you had to memorize. They're never lost. And I never lost to them. Whether you understand the technology, how things move from this one to that one or not. Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Maharaj, in the chapter 1, I think Arjuna addresses the Lord Krishna as a maintainer of people. So does it mean that Arjuna knows already Krishna is a personality of a Godhead even before he see the universal form?
Did you hear his question in the back? A little bit. In chapter 1 of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna addresses Krishna as the maintainer of all living entities.
Yes.
Question. At that chapter 1 stage, did Arjuna understand Krishna as the personality of Godhead even before he spoke chapter 10 and chapter 11, the universal form, and disclosed all kinds of things about himself?
Yes.
That's your question?
Yes.
Well,
That's a funny question.
certainly not fully. Certainly not fully. He addresses him in other ways, Janardana and Rishikesha and other things. Those are names of the Supreme Controller. Now, did he have a full sense of Krishna as the Supreme Controller when he's in Maya? Obviously, no. Maybe he's just being chummy with Krishna, flattering him or something. That's not it either. Conventional. Let's go back. We'll go back to other situations where we know Krishna knew. Let's go to when Krishna came into the assembly where he wanted to make a peace treaty, and he showed a partial manifestation of the universal form, and everybody including Duryodhana, they saw. But they couldn't see because, they were envious of Krishna. They couldn't see. He has some mystic power, but so what? I'm powerful too. So people may see but not see. That's not a very satisfying answer. Krishna, Arjuna, in this, he's entering into a phase where he's becoming bewildered for the purpose of Krishna's giving him instruction. So he could become like us, bewildered, although he's a pure devotee. He's not bewildered. It's not exactly black or white, is what I'm trying to say here. Not exactly that he was just an abject Maya. Not exactly that he was in full realization. Not a very satisfying answer. He wasn't fully in Maya, he wasn't fully Krishna conscious. Well, what was his consciousness? I never heard anybody ask that question before, so I don't know how to answer that question. That's an honest answer. Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Yeah.
When you were discussing the summer solace
Yeah.
the summer solace and then the equinox, it had me think of I'm doing some studies on ancient Egypt,
Okay.
on the ancients, and I can only understand it now because of my studies of the Bhagavad-gita. Because before it was too hard for me to understand because
How things fit together.
right, because before I studied the Bhagavad-gita, I saw it as a polytheistic kind of understanding, but now I understand that the ancient Egyptians understood that this world was full of duality, and they would calculate the sun moving from the east to the west, being the sun going into its death. Every night it would go into its death or whatever. My point being, from what I've studied, I see that the ancient Egyptians understood that God was one, but he had many potencies, and every part of everything on the earth was dependent of the sun. Like if the Osiris Osiris star didn't rise up, then the summer solace wouldn't start, and then the mass water of the Nile would not come in, and the influx of water would create the fertility of the land from the desert, and they had a metaphysical understanding of life, with God being in the center. So I was wondering if these people were indeed
Which people?
monks.
Egyptian people?
Yeah, the ancients, if they were monks or brahmanas in a sense, if they had God front and center
Yeah,
in their life.
they had wisdom that people today don't have.
Yeah, they say that there's something, a consciousness that they had that we can't tap into anymore.
Well, that's an understatement. I mean, how did they build the pyramids, and how they do what they did, and how they know what they knew, and their capacity was greater. It's Kali Yuga.
Yeah. So they were before Kali Yuga.
Oh, but whatever, I don't know whether before Kali Yuga, whatever they were,
Yeah.
they weren't dull like us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And capacity diminishes and diminishes, and doesn't get better, it gets worse.
Yeah.
So, whatever their status was, they had access to reality with a capital R greater than people today do. Than the greatest of intellectuals and puffy-wuffies and scientists and everybody. They had greater capacity.
Yeah. It's astounding when you really study it and you see
Well,
how
there's lots
much
of cultures like that. Lots of cultures like
Yeah.
that.
No, I meant the study of the planets, and the personifying the planets into people is kind of what we do with Krishna. We personify him so
No,
that
no,
we
we
can
don't.
understand him.
We
No?
don't personify him so that we can understand him. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Well,
Don't
I thought,
equate Egyptians with Vedic picture. That you know, the anthropomorphic conception of God is a hits a siren. You hit the wrong button. Don't go there.
Well, no, I meant like taking God
He's done that before.
and like understanding him as a form, as a person.
But that's
then we
because he
can
is, not because
understand
we
him.
personified him.
I see.
We're not projecting he's like us.
Right.
That's personifying.
Right.
To make it convenient or whatever, practical or cute or neat, aesthetic, we deify something, a force in nature. Lots of cultures do that, and it arises from dormant within every living entity. There's knowledge of our eternal relationship with the Supreme. That's where it arises from. And if you don't really know the Supreme, then you personify something. The wind. I mean, not like, anyway.
Yeah, I get
A
it.
feather.
I get it.
Something.
Well, I meant that in the understanding of Krishna as a person helps us understand Krishna more. So in the same sense, understanding the planets in relation to one another and in relation to the cycles of the earth and the people on the earth can help us understand.
Yes. What you're saying
astronomy more.
is in this purport.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying that my studies right now is like,
And what I'm saying to you is be careful.
yeah.
Manoratena. You've heard that phrase?
No.
You know what a ratha is?
Yeah.
You know, ratha yatra, it's a cart
Yeah.
or a chariot. There's the mana ratha, the chariot of the mind. Called speculation, manoratha.
Yeah.
You won't understand truths about Krishna through that manoratha. And your appreciation, I'm not diminishing the symmetry between Egyptian culture and ancient Vedic culture and so forth. But be very careful that from your position of being a tiny little bit of light and you're looking for the sun. That's not how you find the sun. The sun is self-luminous and you find it that way. Be careful. Be careful. Tendency, there's two tendencies that are to be carefully avoided. Sense gratification and manoratha tendency, mental speculation. We're interested in knowledge that's coming down in descending fashion, and through the medium of service and devotion to Vaishnavas and Guru and Krishna, we can then have access to understand that descending knowledge. That's our method. Descending knowledge method. Through the medium of bhakti. That's our method. The other one, be very cautious. It's a strong tendency, like sense gratification is strong. Mental speculation is a strong tendency, and how this compares to that, compares to that, compares to that. And then feel some happiness, and then the next thing you know, you come in for a crash landing, and your happiness went away, and I don't know what happened. I was like flying up there, and then all of a sudden, something happened. Yes?
Guru Maharaj, how would we explain to a new devotee about the authority of the Vedas? Why the reason they should trust what the Vedas say?
You heard the question in the back? No? When we're having some exchange with a newer devotee or a new person, how do we help them understand why it's a good idea to accept the authority of the Vedas? think it was a lecture in Conway Hall in London. To a public audience, Prabhupada explained it. And it has to do with, there are, according to systems of knowledge, Vedic system of knowledge, there are three principal ways of knowing things. 1, sense perception. 2, inference, logic and reason. 3, descending knowledge. And you can go through the first 2 and say they're fallible, they're fallible. So what's left is this descending knowledge fallible or infallible? Well, if the source of knowledge, it's notional or theoretical. If the source of knowledge is perfect, then the descending knowledge is perfect. So if you want perfect knowledge, you need descending knowledge coming from a perfect source. So now, is there such a thing as a perfect source? And from that perfect source, perfect knowledge. So at least the concept is that's what the Vedas are, or taken in a broader sense, that's what Scripture is. It's revealed knowledge. God is revealing truths about Himself. That's what Scripture is. It can be through others, but He's revealing knowledge about Himself. And in the case of Bhagavad-gita, He's not through someone, He's doing it Himself. He's revealing truths about Himself directly. It's a very unique Scripture. To my knowledge, it's the only one of its kind where God is speaking about Himself, is revealing transcendence directly about Himself, the spiritual world, living entities, and reality. He's directly revealing it. So going back, if somebody wants not just armchair knowledge, but infallible knowledge, the first 2 options, and there's variations on the theme, but sense perception and inference and logic and reason, they're fallible, guaranteed, absolutely guaranteed. So if there's anything that's a possibility, it's this descending knowledge from a perfect source. So you get knowledge from a perfect person, you got perfect knowledge. So let's take a look at this Vedic text and see what it says. Depending upon the person, here's something that I share with people sometime. Last night, there was a program in New Jersey that got canceled because of the storm, but I was supposed to speak about the teachings of Kapila. That's what they're doing at that particular gathering in Dover, New Jersey. And I would have shared with them, so now I'm sharing this evening. There's a professor, a Nobel laureate, professor at the University of California, Berkeley.
Sorry, I apologize.
And his name is Professor Henry Staph. You can look him up in the Google. Google Guru knows everything. And he accepted a sabbatical. It was a modest paid break from his teaching job, where he went to the Bhaktivedanta Institute Center in Juhu, Bombay. He spent a month, and he studied the teachings of Kapila Dev. And I was told that the man is really austere. He was up before the devotees were up for Mangal Arati, and he didn't go to Mangal Arati because he wasn't, Bhakta staff. So he was watching Mangal Arati from his balcony, overseeing the temple room, and he went, 12 hours a day for a month. Intense scholar. And his assignment was, in your vast knowledge of modern science, is there anything within the field of modern science that would say that it can't be. The teachings of Kapila, the science of matter and spirit, can't be the way he says it, because there's just empiric evidence out there in the field of science that's falsifiable. That's a scientific term, falsifiability. After the month was over, he wrote a little booklet and said, to my knowledge, there's nothing in the field of science that says there's anything. I'm just not saying it's right, but it's not falsifiable. So, then this is a Nobel Prize winner in the field of physics. Not like he knows everything about everything, but, certainly very knowledgeable in the field of science. So if someone that's of that disposition in the field of science, then maybe there's some merit, It's a merit to the model of knowledge that's coming down in a descending fashion. And there's many, many, many other, this example, that you can give examples where statements are there in the Vedas, and lo and behold, that's the way it is. I had this 7:30. You can have a little kirtan in 2 minutes. I had this opportunity some years ago when I had studied Sadhaputa's Mysteries of the Sacred Universe. Mysteries of the Sacred Universe. It's a nice sounding title and not easy to understand. And I made this presentation on the Mysteries of the Sacred Universe at IGSA, Indian Graduate Student Association at the University of Houston. It was in this little mini amphitheater, the kind where the seats go up, so you can see eye contact, and you can, the whole thing. It's a great space. There was maybe 80 people in the audience. They're all grad students, smart young men and ladies, and explaining the configuration of the universe according to the Vedic picture, according to Sadhaputa's writings. And towards the end, there's questions and answers, and one of the fellows said, I'm in my field is physics, and from theoretical physics we can calculate down to a few milliseconds before the Big Bang what happened from that point forward. And then there was another fellow that raised his hand. They didn't ask, is there something in the Vedic model that resembles the Big Bang? They didn't ask, he just declaring what the research showed. Then another fellow said, and it says what happens as the universe expands and expands and expands. There's two models, it's theoretical physics. Two things may happen: that the force of gravity can no longer hold the universe together, and it just dissipates into nothingness. That's an interesting model. Then the other model is it gets to the certain point where it can't expand anymore, and it collapses back upon itself and becomes a singularity again. Voila. Theoretical physics. So I said, my dear friends, I've described to you in some detail how the empiric information that, numbers, empiric information of the structure of the universe, by the use of technology, Hubble telescopes mounted on rocket ships that go off into space and take pictures and send pictures back, and with all that information they can take measurements of the size of planets and the duration of the orbits of planets and all kinds of cosmology information. And the numbers are getting closer and closer to the Vedic ones. But those people didn't have any technology. They received their knowledge in this descending fashion, and by refinement and refining, it's getting closer to, what the picture really is. But not only that, let's take a look. One picture is everything starts from nothing, and it ends up in nothing. So where does it leave you in between? Nothing. And here's another model where the numbers are almost identical the same, where everything starts with a person, everything ends with a person, and in between it's person. Which model? There's a science to both, and you're studying that one, and I'm studying this one. And the Vedic model is the source of everything, upon which everything returns to, is a person. And everything is connected in between to a person, like us. We're not just non-entities floating around in, the universe, and then we either dissipate or implode back into nothingness. Sorry, Charlie, I don't like that model. And I don't like the lifestyle that goes with that model either. But so there's reason to accept the Vedic model. It's empirically accurate, and the effectiveness of it is far more attractive. Thank you.